Now I know what you guys are thinking. What do you mean by this title? The How to Train Your Dragon franchise is still successful and popular, and while that may be true, one could argue that the franchise is not as culturally significant in the zeitgeist as it once was. From sequels and spin-offs that led to diminishing returns to a live-action remake, while profitable, still didn't rejuvenate a lot of energy into this IP. While the first film is still beloved and fondly remembered as one of DreamWorks' best movies, if not the best, the franchise has never recaptured the strength and fantastic storytelling of the first two films, or regained the impactful reputation that the IP had in terms of characters and presence. And after the trilogy ended in some specials and failed spin-off shows, it just faded away. But why is this franchise so beloved yet so irrelevant? Well, let's talk about the slow death of the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. So How to Train Your Dragon is based on the book of the same name by Cressida Crowell. It follows a similar story, but with a few differences, such as Toothless being a small Komodo-like dragon instead of a massive cat-like dragon that he is in the movies. DreamWorks saw potential in this story turning into a franchise, and hired Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders to direct the film. They changed a lot of story elements to make it work better, and also give it their own unique touch, such as their iconic round shapes, a lot like their designs in Lilo and Stitch. In 2010, after a teaser trailer played in front of Monsters vs. Aliens and a big marketing push, How to Train Your Dragon was released, and was an instant success, making over $400 million, and was beloved by critics and audiences, and became an instant classic to many. Some still regard it as DreamWorks' magnum opus, even more so than Shrek and Kung Fu Panda. The franchise was off to a great start and a sequel was inevitable. Before the sequel came out, DreamWorks released a bunch of specials for the film. Gift of the Night Fury, Legend of the Bone Napper, Book of Dragons, and the short-lived Cartoon Network spin-off Dragons Riders of Berk. In 2014, the sequel finally released, and was an even bigger hit than the first, making over $600 million, and was beloved by critics and audiences, still regarded as one of the best animated sequels of all time alongside Toy Story 2, Shrek 2 and Kung Fu Panda 2. The franchise was an absolute powerhouse at this point, and DreamWorks was not done yet. After the sequel, DreamWorks and Netflix produced another spin-off show of the franchise, Dragon's Race to the Edge, which takes place in between 1 and 2, and had a strong run on Netflix. A third film was in development and scheduled to come out in 2017 and 2018, but due to studio reorganizing and distribution deals and shifts, the film didn't come out until 2019, and was the first DreamWorks film to be released under Universal with a new logo and studio head. In 2019, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World was released, and was a solid success, making over $500 million, and was still relatively well received by critics and audiences. But it didn't leave the same impact the first two films did. Nobody talked about it like the others. Nobody was excited for it as they were before. They didn't have the same investment in this franchise as they did before, and so the third film disappeared after it came out and was quickly forgotten after the year's biggest blockbusters such as Avengers Endgame and Toy Story 4 came out. The trilogy was complete and people had already moved on, and so it seemed like the franchise was done, since the directors stated multiple times that their intention was to do a trilogy and not go beyond that. And besides the holiday special that came out in 2019, How to Train Your Dragon: Homecoming, nobody expected this franchise to return, until Peacock announced that another spin-off show of the franchise was in the works, and would take place years after the events of The Hidden World. The travesty of a show we all know as Dragons: The Nine Realms, and immediately, fans were not on board with this show. People hated the cheap animation, the recycled character arcs and stories they ripped straight from the trilogy, as well as just not serving any purpose other than to cash in on the IP even more, since they can't do a fourth film due to the directors and main creative heads of the franchise absolutely refusing to do it. Similar to Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale of Back to the Future and Christopher Nolan of The Dark Knight, the series lasted for a while, but it ultimately did not win fans and audiences over and was hidden away by the studio after its final episode. And after a complete dumpster fire of a disaster like that, you'd think that would kill any hope for the franchise ever coming back. But after that, it was announced that a live-action remake was in the works, and that Gerard Butler was reprising his role as Stoic the Vast, and that original directors Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders were returning to direct. The remake was released in 2025, shortly after the Lilo and Stitch remake, and was a solid success. It didn't make anywhere near as much as Lilo and Stitch, but it still pulled in solid numbers, making over $600 million, and was even well received by critics and audiences. which led to Universal greenlighting a sequel, which is a remake of the sequel, and even getting Cate Blanchett to reprise her role as Waka for the sequel remake. Now while it seems this franchise is doing very well, I feel the IP is not as impactful or important as it used to be. Despite the remake being successful and audiences receiving it well, the franchise isn't as special or unique as it once was. It isn't as beloved of a franchise as it was at its peak. It's declined and gone through a slew of misfires and hard times that has ultimately led to where it is today. And while some could argue that Kung Fu Panda and Shrek had worse downfalls, at least they had serviceable conclusions that wrapped up their stories well. By the time How to Train Your Dragon 3 came out, people had already lost interest. The franchise had become stale and bland and uninteresting to them. Years of waiting for the follow-up to one of the best DreamWorks sequels, only to get a film that was just okay at best but forgettable at worst. And many people expressed that when it came out, it felt like there was no more passion or energy in this franchise anymore, and that the creators were just going through the motions and trying to make the most serviceable conclusion they could without really thinking about how to present a compelling and engaging experience that satisfied the audience. And sadly it just didn't deliver the finale that people wanted, and they just weren't invested or interested, and they just didn't have any excitement for this series anymore. They were completely checked out at this point, and the franchise suffered because of it. So overall guys, while the franchise is still popular and beloved by millions of people for its characters, world and stories, it isn't anywhere near as big as it was when the first two films released, and it declined in viewership and cultural significance as it went along. The spin-offs weren't of any help due to them being trashed and hated by fans and average audience members. The franchise truly fell to rock bottom and was ruined beyond comprehension. While the remake was definitely a step in the right direction, reigniting some interest and excitement in this franchise, it still didn't completely succeed in bringing this franchise back to its former glory. Only time will tell if this franchise reaches the heights of the first two films as it goes along. Anyways guys, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.